Churches are relevant today as much as they were arguably in the medieval era. However, in the medieval era and even earlier, they structured every single part of society from first breath to last rite. The calendar, that was dictated by worship, that was dictated by the church, and so on and so forth, with sacramental rites, as I say, from baptism to marriage to when you died, everything was about the church. Now what's interesting is that we tend to think that the medieval era everyone went to church every single day, and that's not the case. It was still Sundays and the high feast days, and there are still really interesting stories of priests getting extremely angry because people are out in the churchyard and they're playing football and they're not worshipping on a Sunday. So yes, they were an extremely important part of society, but today perhaps in different ways, as heritage assets, as important sites of history, architecture, as well as where we have great important events. York was extremely important. Pope Gregory in the 7th century sort of declared it the northern part of the Roman Catholic Church, and so from then on that's why we see so many churches, or why we think we see so many churches that proliferated throughout the Middle Ages. And just before the Reformation, when we got rid of quite a lot, there were between 40 and 50 churches. We saw Emperor Constantine die here, so that's sort of when things started. Then the birth of Christianity, and then, as I say, we have the Powerhouse, which was York Minster, which was the northern centre of Christianity in the Middle Ages up until the Reformation era in the 16th century. Because we had so many parishes within York, so many areas dictated in this tiny little diocese, as it were, they were sort of competing, but they were also needed because there were so many people worshipping. And so because it was such an important centre of Christianity, we needed them. There's also the importance of pilgrimage, of the saints, and therefore bringing in money. You needed to go to a saint, perhaps you were unwell, perhaps you needed a cure for an illness, perhaps you wanted a day off and your boss wasn't giving to it. You went to the saints to plead for whatever it might be, or remission of sin. And therefore, if you had a local saint in your parish church, you would go and visit that more often, and you would give an offering, and therefore that would bring in money to the church, and therefore they just amassed and amassed. Who paid for churches is extremely interesting, because we have a lot of wealthy benefactors and patrons who were investing in their soul, post-obit. Once they had died, they wanted people in chantry chapels. Chantry chapels were sort of little side chapels where you would have a priest praying for your soul after you died. So the more money you gave, the fancier the chantry chapel you could have, the more the priest was going to pray for you after your soul, and hopefully you'll get through purgatory, you've gone to heaven, and you've done your bit through money, of course, through your wealth. And then they wanted to do it for different reasons. It was largely remission of sin, it was largely to get to heaven, but we have to remember that churches, they're representations of heaven on earth. That's why they were built. They are a representation of the heavenly Jerusalem. Think the book of Revelation. That's what they are there for. So they're there as well to represent God, to be a temple to God, but also there for the populace as well. The nave in our great cathedrals was used by the populace largely, although if they were a pilgrim they could maybe get to the East End and go and visit a shrine or whatever it might be. But the nave is really interesting because although we had a lot of worship there were also secular activities, and I use that term loosely, but everything from gambling to markets to dog fights, chicken fights, whatever, were going on in the nave. So that was an extremely interesting sort of congregational space as well. We see investment, patronage, bequeathments from all levels of society. If you were at the lowest rungs of society, you could perhaps go and visit your saint, as I say, make an offering, and in the hopes that they would cure your illness or whatever your ailment. That's, I suppose, the very lowest form of providing investment into a church. However, if you were perhaps part of a guild, you could then club together and you might have your own altar, you might have your own stained glass. In York Minster there are some great windows by the bell founders, and they have little bells, so we think that they were given by the Guild of the Bell Founders. And then you'll work your way up to your sort of nobility, your aristocracy as it later became, and they might bequeath a chantry chapel, yes for commemoration, but also to save their souls after death. But you might also put money in to create a better shrine for your local saint too. So that all levels of society were sort of pitching in and saying, how can I get to heaven quicker, and how can I be commemorated?